Airlines today are oscillating between greenwashing and green hushing. That's what I mean by them playing defense.
This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back. I'm Courtney Miller with Visual Approach Analytics. With me, as always, Garrick Deschavan of Collateral Verifications. Garrick, who are we talking to today?
So today, look, we've got another kind of cool podcast. We've got some interesting guests that are going to come on our show today. We've got Shashank Nigam and Dirk Singer, which they're both with Simpliflying. Shashank is currently founder and CEO of Simpliflying. He also hosts a podcast called the Sustainability in the Air podcast. He is also instructor of commercial strategy for IATA, head of digital and social media for Al Airways. He was the global lead and brand strategy of Airline Capital Associates. He was a development analyst at Endeca, co-founder of Styx Media. And also, he is a board member of, Circularity, Carbon Click, Travicoin, GoBump Free, Whitetail Airlines. So he gets around. He's definitely, he does a lot. I'm impressed. He's got a degree from Singapore Management University and Carnegie Mellon University in Information Systems and Business Management. And then we're also going to have Dirk Singer, who is the head of sustainability for Simpliflying. Dirk is also was the associate partner for Make Honey, head of social media for FlyBMI, and founder of Rabbit and co-founder of Cow. So I guess there's something there with the farm animals. I know. Yeah, yep.
I have my first question locked and loaded.
Yep. And so he has a degree in history and law from the University of Edinburgh. In any case, Shashank and Dirk, this is your time on wing.
Just a quick intermission before we continue with the show. We do get a lot of questions about how our listeners can support the show, and frankly, the easiest way is to continue the spirit of the show, which is just to reach out to us at conferences. But we also run businesses as well, and you can support us by supporting a lot of the work that we do. You can support the work that I do through Visual Approach by visiting visualapproach.io, where we produce a lot of research and analysis, a lot of data visualizations.
From my side, obviously, I focus more on metals, so anything that's aircraft related, if you're looking for valuations, whether it's on aircraft engines, I'm happy to help with any of those types of projects. So we appreciate certainly the opportunities to work with all of you, and we certainly also appreciate just the fact that people are willing to listen to what we have to say and enjoy kind of our thoughts and takes on what we think is a fascinating industry. So thank you.
Okay, back to the show.
Well, so Shashank and Dirk, thanks for being on our show today. Certainly excited to kind of get to know you guys a little more and hear about everything that you've got going on. So as one of the things that I always ask our guests, as we get started is, we love to hear how you got your start in aviation, where the passion came from, and kind of where it took you to where you are today. So I would say, Shashank, why don't we start with you and just kind of, hear how you got to where you are.
Sure. I will start and I will end from my start into aviation, how I met Dirk, and then we can go to Dirk.
Oh, segue.
So,
perfect.
This is like professional.
Yeah, you've done this before.
We've done this. we've done this. Hey, we wrote a book together, so we better know each other by now. So, it's getting there. So I have a technology background. I used to work for an MIT startup in Boston back in 2008, but I used to like planes a lot. And I wanted to do something in aviation, but I had no background in aviation. I, believe it or not, applied for a job at Virgin America and tracked their IP address to see when they will click on my blog to come and check out the links I included in my emails. And they said, sorry, you're not qualified enough, and we need someone with more experience. And
did they ever look at your blog?
Yes, they did.
Okay, they did.
4 of them did. I checked all of the hits coming in from their offices near SFO back in the day. So, and that was deeply disappointing. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to start this blog, which was very new at that time. And I have this deep interest in branding and brand strategy, and I found nothing in terms of resources online at that intersection of brand and aviation. So I started this blog called Simpliflying, in which thrice a week I wrote just stories and case studies around airline branding and technology. And I would do simple analysis, and the blog became quite popular, I would say, in the first couple of years. I think there was Mary Kirby with Runway Girl, John Osterwood, Flight Blogger. I think there was Flying with Fish, if you remember.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And then there was View from the Wing, which I think still exists.
Yeah.
It does.
And then there was Simplifying. In the original blogging days, I think this was pretty much it. If I'm not...
We got to mention Brett too.
Yeah, Brett. Of course, Brett was always there. Brett, I think, was always there.
Yeah, he's old. He's old as dirt.
Exactly. So, started blogging, and I think I was the only one with the take around the marketing and brand side of it. I think Brett did a really good job around network and route analysis. John Osterwood had always gotten in on Boeing and everything aircraft back in the day. And of course, Mary Kirby looked at in-flight and passenger experience. So got blogging and started writing at that intersection. And then I realized, you know what? I can't be doing this part-time while working a full-time job in Boston. I left that, moved back in with my parents to support Simplifying. I had savings for about 8 months. And I told them, listen, I'm moving back in. In 8 months, I'll try to build some business out of it. And if I don't have money, I'll go, I'll go back to technology and find a job. They had no idea what I was talking about. They didn't know what a blog was and why I wanted to leave a very nice job in the US to move back to Singapore. It was living the American dream for an immigrant. I had my H-1B, and it was a big deal at that time. Left that, started Simplifying, and started showing up at conferences just to learn. And got on the stage, shared some ideas, and I realized, hey, you know what? These airlines don't really engage customers right. So how can we help them engage customers? How can we help them build trust specifically? And that was a key thing I focused on. And that's where technology came in. I was a young chap at that time. I was just 25, 26. Nobody really wanted to talk to me. And I brought social media and technology in to the discussions. And then they wanted to learn from someone who was young and someone who was an outsider to aviation. And therein lies the story of Simplifying, where we focused on helping airlines build trust, initially through social media, then we expanded to digital strategy, digital marketing, crisis comms, all of it for airlines. In the first 10 years, ended up working with just over 100 airlines in airports globally, really big ones like Emirates and Lufthansa, to really small ones like Estonian Air and Pluna, both of whom that no longer exist. And I think back in 2010 or 2011, we were hosting our annual awards for the best airlines and airports on social media. And London Gatwick won the Best Airport in the World award on social media. Dirk Singer came over to receive that award. And that's how he and I met. So over to you, Dirk.
Well.
Yeah, so thank you, Shashank. That's indeed how I got involved with Simplifying. So my background is originally in the PR and advertising digital marketing industry here in London. And as part of that, I started 2 agencies. I started with general FMCG clients, but then I started moving into really more by chance than anything else, into getting aviation clients. So as Shashank says, one of those was London Gatwick Airport. We came on board at the time just after it was sold off by BAA. So that was about 2010, 2011. And that was the time when social media was first becoming, a thing. And obviously using customer service for social media for airlines and airports was still very much in its infancy. And Gatwick identified this as one of the ways in which they could, put some clear blue water between themselves as Heathrow and the other London airports, and we, helped them get that off the ground. That's actually what we won the award for. I also did work for British Midland International, obviously BMI, the airline that no longer exists. I did a lot of their online PR and influencer relations and blogger relations and social media for about 6 or 7 years, and also Manchester Airports Group. So I kind of, moved into the aviation space from doing other clients. I started working with Shashank in about 2016 because really I was looking for something that allowed me to pursue this full time, to do airlines and airports work on a full-time basis, and B, also from a lifestyle point of view, it had something with a bit more flexibility. One of the things about working at Simplifying is we are all remote, and the working hours are very flexible. So it's not a case you have to be in at a certain time and leave at a certain time. You have your work, and whether it gets done at 2 a.m. or 2 p.m., it's up to you, obviously, so long as it's as long as it's delivered at the end of the day. And I was looking for something around that. So I started helping with some content and marketing projects. I edited a magazine for Simplifying, which is no longer around, called Airline Marketing Monthly, which looked on a monthly basis at, as the name says, at some of the best airline marketing campaigns that were ongoing worldwide, and that was supported by sponsorship and advertising. That folded during COVID because obviously during COVID there was no more airline advertising work around, to pay for it, and that's actually when we started moving direction anyway. At the moment, I am looking after Simplifying sustainability efforts. Now, that's obviously not where I started from. I have a very different background, as I said. And the way that came about is in 2019, you'll remember that flight shaming first kind of became a thing. I mean, Greta Thunberg did a trip across the Atlantic in her catamaran. There were various warnings about how, consumers in countries like the Netherlands and Sweden and Germany were not booking domestic flights because of the whole flight shaming movement. And I guess many of us saw this as an existential or near existential threat for the industry, because obviously if flying becomes socially unacceptable, then that directly hits at what airlines do. Now, I'm a believer that that mobility and mobility expressed through air travel is a force for good. Like Shashank, I've lived all over. I mean, my dad's American, my mother's German. I've lived most of my life in the UK. So my life is a product of air travel. My son is 16, and I want him to have the same benefits that I've had, but obviously in a way that that is more environmentally conscious, and that that provides a way forward. So in 2019, I first started getting involved in this. We wrote a report at Simplifying all about flight shaming. It's called the Flight Shaming Report, and that got quite a lot of pickup, quite a lot of traction.
Wonderful name. Wonderful name.
Absolutely.
Well done.
And I remember that that Shashank and myself and some colleagues in early 2020 we decided that this would be the way forward. Again, with the pandemic, everything kind of froze, and we did something else for the next 18 months, and we picked it up again in late 2021. I sort of like to say that I'm the last generation of sustainability heads that does not come through this with a professional qualification. I'm self-taught, so I have no scientific background. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an engineer. I have no science degree. I have no sustainability degree, which are increasingly being offered. So everything that I've learned has been, on the job. But obviously, I've learned enough to with Shashank to be able to turn around, 60,000 words on this topic, and to produce, reports and research articles on a weekly basis. And I guess that the skills that I had in my previous career, in the PR industries, does help, because one of the issues you encounter when you come into a fairly technical space is that people are very bad at explaining what it is that they actually do. And I think that that's one of the things that that I and also we as a business are able to bring to the table. I mean, we were at a conference the other day, and a delegate described the content work that we do. He described it as the gateway drug into sustainability. So, sort of, if you want to have an introduction to to the sector, then he said that what we produce is a very good way of getting into it, which I think is a great compliment, something that we sort of try and do, because it's an important issue, and we try and make it accessible for a wider audience.
Yeah, the gateway drug. Like, what a compliment.
The gateway drug, exactly.
It's the first time I heard of it too.
No, but it is. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I'm really interested. Okay, Gatwick.
Yes.
What did you do at Gatwick that attracted Shashank's attention? Because, look, is Gatwick. And
right.
By the way, my preferred airport into London, just going to say, as long as if I'm going to Victoria Station or Paddington, doesn't matter to me. 6 of one, half dozen of another. But I want to know what's the landscape like in marketing the airports? What did you do at Gatwick that was? Give me a success story. I'm fascinated by this.
Okay,
did you do the Welcome to Luton thing?
No. I mean, obviously, bearing in mind this was pre-pandemic, and obviously the landscape was a lot different. And this was, we're talking 8, 9, 10 years ago. But at the time, we introduced the first 24-hour Twitter support service for an airport, certainly in Europe. Now, these days, that's nothing special. But if you're talking about 2011, 2012, that was quite a revolutionary thing to do. And we trained the operations team, so the people who are sitting in the operations room, to look out for tweets that mentioned the airport to be able to respond to problems in real time. And as I said, today, a lot of, almost everyone does that, but at the time, no one did, or certainly no one in Europe did. I'm sure that airports in the US, were doing so. And so it's really sort of utilizing social media as a customer services tool in a way that other airports in the UK and Europe were not doing so, at that point in time.
Yeah, and really, kind of what I'm getting to is kind of the core of simplifying what you started, Shashank. Morphing from a blog, kind of a learning on the job blog to, all those names you listed are all now successful business owners of that started from a blog, yourself included, and it's along this. We say social media almost has a different. It's almost it's an ancient term because now we call it communications, right? Because it's how these companies communicate. I'm really interested in kind of this path, really kind of from where you started. How did you decide you were going to make money off of this? How did you start making money to become successful as Simplifying, kind of based on this?
Absolutely. It brings me back into one of the earliest conversations I had. You may remember David Parker Brown.
Oh yeah, I saw him not even a year ago. Yes,
exactly. And he was another blogger at that time.
Yeah,
I respected him a lot. We used to catch up often. And again, early days, I met up with him. We had a nice dinner in Seattle, I think somewhere near his place. And it got me thinking, hey, you know what? I think the time is right for me to think, how do I monetize this? Do I start putting ads on the blog, monetize the blog? Do I want to be a good writer or a journalistic, in a journalistic sense, a blogger? Or do I want to build a business? And I realized, going back to my motivations, I love planes. I love the airline business. And I did not want to just write about it. I wanted to work with them to transform their businesses. And it was a clear decision then I took that, you know what? Yes, the blog will always be there. At that time, it was my identity, but I need to build a business beyond just writing. I'm not a trained journalist. John Ostrover and Brett Snyder are way better journalists, and I will not pretend to be a journalist. I did have some very fresh insights on how airlines can build trust, or aviation businesses can build trust at that time through social media, and I wanted to then leverage it. How it started was quite interesting. I first had to establish myself as a brand. And remember, I told you I went back to Singapore. And I saw, this was January of 2009, I saw an ad in the newspaper, the Straits Times at that time, with a full-page ad saying aviation, World Aviation Congress or something like that happening. LCC Congress, it was called, by Terrapin in Singapore. And I thought, wow. And the keynote speaker was Tony Fernandez, CEO of AirAsia, a new LCC coming in. And every other airline CEO was speaking, from India, from Singapore, from China. And I thought, wow, if only I can get in. So I called them up and I said, can I get a ticket? And they said, yes, you can. It's $4,500. And my mind is blown. Like, really? $4,500? He says, yes, unless if you're from an airline or you're from the media, then we've got passes. I said, well, I'm definitely not from an airline. And just so you know, getting a media accreditation in Singapore is possibly the world's second hardest place to get a media pass, because I think the hardest would be North Korea, then comes Singapore.
Wow.
There was
well said.
there was no way I was getting a media accreditation officially as she requested in 3 days. And I said, listen, I have a blog. I have a digital camera. I know this thing called Google Video exists. I will interview your speakers and upload their videos on Google Video. YouTube was still an infant at that time, and Google had not bought YouTube by then. And I will upload their videos, and you might get some extra exposure. By the way, here's one I did for Emirates A380 first flight at JFK, for which I took a Chinatown bus down from Boston, stopping in Connecticut, continuing on to Manhattan, and then took the LIRR from Manhattan to JFK to get that interview done. Show them the evidence, which, by the way, for the record, had 68 views at that time, that Emirates video. And she bit the bait. She took it. And she replied to me. She says, you know what? Sure. Why don't you come in? You need to do at least 10 videos. I said, all right, I will. I get in there. Tony Fernandez doesn't show up. So do half of the other speakers. And I'm thinking, they just advertise all these CEOs. But they didn't show up. I still got my 10 interviews. Was like a sponge, just learning about the industry. It was heaven, just being in there. Met quite a few interesting people. Patrick Bowdis from Airbus was there, then Bombardier after that. Met a few people today who are running Indigo Airlines in India, who were running SpiceJet at that time. Met Azran Osman Rani from AirAsia X, who was subbing in for Tony Fernandez. Did lots of interviews. As I was walking out, this is where it gets interesting. I see a brochure for the same conference happening in Abu Dhabi, LCC Aviation Middle East, in March. I write to the guy on the email contact saying, listen, can I come, get some coverage for yours? I'm running an independent blog. He replies saying, yes, you can. And if I cover your flights, do you mind sitting on a panel to interview as an independent moderator? And I'm like, hell yeah, I was thinking who's going to pay for my flights.
Yeah, magic words.
Yep. Airbnb did not exist at that time. I crashed on a friend's couch, woke up 4 a.m. every morning because of the azan, the mosque was right behind the house, and was down there. But by now, I had learned something about conferences. Half of the keynote speakers did not show up. I showed up with a presentation in a USB drive with all about branding through the recession through social media. Went to the organizer and said, listen, in case anyone doesn't show up, I've got your back. I have a presentation ready. Let me know if you want to present. It's a really cool topic around branding through the recession, 2009, 2010. He says, sure, I'll let you know. 10 minutes later, I go back to him again. Hey, anyone backed out yet? He says, I'll let you know. 10 minutes later, I go back to him again. Hey, anyone backed out yet? And he says, listen, it's as if you want someone to back out. I said, no, I'm just telling you I've got your back. He doesn't come back to me the night before. Next morning, 8:45 a.m. I'm early, sitting in the front row, ready to go. This guy comes running, sweating to me. He says, listen, you said you had a presentation. I said, yeah, what happened? He says, listen, my opening keynote speaker is not here. That's Adel Ali from Air Arabia. The room has 1,500 people. About 700 of them are journalists expecting this top airline CEO to come in. Do you mind going up on stage? And he introduced me to Peter Harbison from Kappa at that time, who was chairing the conference. Peter then introduced me on stage, and boom, everyone has this young guy talking about Twitter customer service and dealing with crisis, and how actually there was one US airport that I used an example of that was CAK. Any guesses? CAK?
Akron.
Yeah,
Canton, Akron. Been there many times. Left
you.
a couple divots in the runway.
First airport to have a Twitter handle, and I talked about Southwest. First airline to have a blog. I talked about Azul and JetBlue at that time, doing some crowdsourcing competitions. And guess what? As I got off, these journalists were paid to come and get quotes from somebody. That somebody didn't show up. I did. I was being interviewed by people I didn't know about, and completely being misquoted in the papers the next day. But then as I walked out,
you got the full experience then.
Yeah, I got the whole thing. I was quoted in the Khalij Times, the main paper there, saying LCCs will be 50% of the regional traffic within 2 years. And I'm thinking, really? I never said that. And there was only one low-cost airline in the Middle East at that time. No Fly Dubai, no Al Jazeera, none of the other guys. Only Emirates existed. along with Air Arabia. Got off the stage. By that evening, I was invited to be interviewed on CNBC Arabia, talking about aviation forecasts as an independent. Gets a bit interesting if you want to go down in the weeds. I go in there and he says, "Put this in your head. The question will come in your earpiece." I said, "In my earpiece? Why can't you just ask me the question?" He says, "It's CNBC Arabia. The questions are in Arabic." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" The questions are in Arabic. "Okay, tell me it's recorded because my mom's asking when to watch this." He says, "No, it's live." He says, you're kidding me. The questions are in Arabic and it's live. I do not know Arabic and you're telling me it's live. I'm totally freaking out. And he says, "Don't worry. There'll be a translator who will speak Arabic on top of you. So you just reply in English. We will overlay it." Okay. Till date, I do not know what I said. It's all in Arabic. So by the end of this conference in March of 2009, now it helps I was prepared with a decently good deck and some good fresh messages. By the end of this conference, I had moderated a panel. I had been on TV. I had been quoted in newspapers. I had given a keynote speech. And I was in business in terms of at least the conference is paying for my flights.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right? So that's how I got into conferences, and I haven't got the first deal yet, but that's how the credibility started going up.
I think that's a masterclass. That's a fantastic story. Garrick, are you taking notes?
I am.
We gotta,
you know what? At this conference tomorrow, like when we go at ISTAT, I'm just going to keep asking. Look, I don't have a presentation, but I can just bullshit like the best of them. So just let me on.
Yeah, and it's true. He can.
OEMs, no problem. I can talk. Just no problem. That's great. That's a fantastic story. That's amazing.
Yeah, but I've never heard that story before, Shashank, and it truly is like a masterclass. I'll tell you exactly where I would have personally been along that experience. And that would have been, some sort of debilitating imposter syndrome on like day one, right? Yeah. I've used you as an example a few times of just kind of being in the right place at the right time, and fearless, I think, is the term. And I had never heard that story.
So, all right. So I'll ask a question in terms of, you obviously been doing this since, I guess, 2008, right? It's just kind of when you started the blog. And so when you think about kind of branding, messaging, and how far it's come from when you started the blog to where we are today, like what have been some of the biggest changes that you've seen in those 16 years?
You guys understand soccer? Can I use a soccer
you
analogy?
Mean football?
Football.
Since we are just
I do very much.
Good.
Listen,
Thank you so much.
I've got a Toronto FC soccer ball up there. That's right.
That's it. Uh-huh. Yeah. Now we're talking. I just for the Americans listening here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, in simple words, well done, Courtney. Love it. Love it. My former home. So in simple words, branding for airlines has gone from a 9 attacking players near the opponent's goalpost to everyone in the midfield now everyone playing defense and having no goalkeeper. Airlines are marketing and branding are playing defense when it comes to branding today. That wasn't the case when I started. They still were trying to differentiate themselves. They were talking. A lot of the U.S. airlines are a large homogeneous blob, which is how I started my first book. You could really, I could not tell the difference if you asked me 6 months later whether I flew United, American, or Delta. Now, yes, I think United has a better app, or Delta might have a better passenger experience based on which aircraft you're flying. But back in the day, they didn't. So they really had to market to differentiate themselves, even globally. I think a lot of airlines, you look at the Singapore of the world, the Emirates, the Lufthansas, they spent some effort in creatively differentiating themselves from a brand perspective. Like I said, we started with the focus, how can we help build trust? Through digital, through social, and we really got into the core. Okay, how do we bring out the essence of the brand digitally? And learned a lot. And I think airlines were doing a really good job. Then came COVID, by the way. And just
COVID,
the evolution.
what was this? I don't remember.
Yes, the pandemic.
The thing. The Big Bang, we call it.
Going back just a bit of history, right? We, in the first 10 years of Simplifying, we had worked with just over 100 airports and airlines globally. Then came the pandemic, and we said, okay, our business is down 98% in 4 weeks. Airlines from Japan to the Middle East to everywhere else were just saying, sorry, we can't pay you. And we asked the same question again. In these times, how can we help airlines build trust? Dirk was very much a part of the team at that time, and we said, you know what? We got to focus on health safety. We launched the world's first digital audit for airlines to rate them on health safety measures, because we believe if you can put these out there, travelers will come back. Airlines ran to us with pretty much the last buck in their bank at that time. This was in partnership with Joe Leader at Apex, who has been a great supporter since those days, where we rated airlines on 62 touch points on, hey, do you have hand sanitizer? What are your masking policies? Do you require PCR tests? And these were done on a very short notice within a week of airlines' applications with actual evidence, and would give them a rating. And KLM had this rating, let's say, on their IFE screens as you boarded. Turkish Airlines had these screens inside the amenity kit pouches and certified by Apex and Simplifying. Sri Lankan Airlines had it on the door next to the One World logo. I wish I could have flown Sri Lankan Airlines at that time just to see my company's
Take
logo
picture,
on the plane.
Yeah.
That would have been really cool. Never saw it. And we felt, wow, you know what? We are truly helping airlines build trust. And Dirk at that time wrote a daily newsletter called COVID Av Daily for us, which went out to the entire industry throughout the, I think, 2 years it lasted, every single day.
Absolutely. And of course, during those times, you remember there was enough to talk about every day. Every day you would have something about, testing, vaccines, restrictions, travel bans, consumer sentiments. There was enough material on a daily basis to fill that thing. And I think certainly one of the things, I guess that the story that Shashank's telling is that it's a good example of how Simplifying's been able to, can be very agile and to react to circumstances very, very quickly. And then, as Shashank said, from losing 90% plus of our business to starting a new business line almost overnight. But I mean, certainly personally, one of the things that I found during that period is that I think we all kind of remember that sense of shock, and the sense of almost helplessness during March and April, 2020, when travel kind of stopped overnight. And obviously we all work in the industry, and our lives are very much formed by air travel. And I think one of the worst things for me was a feeling of helplessness, was a feeling that that events were kind of, gathering on momentum of our own, and kind of passing us by. And one of the slogans that we had at the time, remember, Simplifying, was this idea of don't be a spectator. And simply by producing the newsletter, what we did was we produce information that that help people in the industry keep informed, and be able to make decisions based on that. And then on the back of that, as Shashank said, we were able to launch products like a testing platform that we did during the time, and also the health and safety index with Apex that we did.
So I would make the argument that while it could be referred to as a pivot, it actually wasn't. It sounds to me like Simplifying has been set up to help airlines build trust. And that's what it took for those airlines to build trust during COVID, right? It was the same mission, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Shashank, but
You're absolutely right.
Which is so that leads me then to the next, and I'm really interested, and I don't want to blow past your comment about kind of the airlines moving from offense to defense in their branding.
Let me just finish the transition there, right? I was just at the close there, and completely thank you for bringing it back.
Yeah, I'm good.
Back in the day, first 10 years, let's go put ourselves out there, stick our neck out there, differentiate our brands. Here's what we truly stand for. Here's how we're different from competitors. It was, I think, the heyday of airline marketing. After the 70s, it was the decade of 2010s. Then came COVID. So this is where all marketing stopped. It's like turning the sites gray. Like all marketing just stopped. You're not putting fares out. You're just not marketing. So marketing goes to zero. So it's going from attack to zero, not defense yet. Then, so Simplifying is completing 15 years now. We asked the same question again. how can we help airlines build trust? And the answer, glaring in front of us, is for the next 15 years, airlines need to get sustainability right. Because when it comes to sustainability, the industry is fighting defense. They are playing on the back foot. And that's what we are helping. So hence, sort of just closing that loop there.
Now, you're still working with airlines on the branding, in addition, right? So I would assume now that travel is back, there is more attention on the branding side. And
Absolutely.
then in addition, the sustainability, which from an airline perspective is interesting, which leads again back to your original comments about, I think Dirk mentioned 2017 with flight shaming, which is all connected, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. So we launched a new practice for sustainability within Simplifying 2 years ago. And that's the newest line of business we've entered.
Okay, so tell us a bit about that, your approach. I know you have a book. You have more than one book. You have, the book that I have, and I just looked. It's 2016 was the date. So, and what's really interesting, this really talks about brands, right? Airline brands. It follows your journey, and then the focus, the increased practice on sustainability, and I do kind of hear about that shift and some of the learnings that you've had in that as well.
Absolutely, I think Dirk is well positioned to talk about sustainability to begin with. Why this is important.
So I mean, maybe we'll pivot from the sort of what we learned during COVID, and I think that's actually a very important lesson during the pandemic that can be pulled forward into sustainability, which is the fact that the reality is most people do not fly, or most people rather even in the so-called global north, they fly once or twice a year and they fly on vacation. They are not like us. They are not frequent flyers. And one of the lessons that I learned during the pandemic was that it was the thing that was the easiest for people to give up. People were presented with a load of lifestyle changes they had to make. So obviously not going to restaurants, or sort of social distancing, or mask wearing, certain places being closed, schools being closed for a long period of time, and no travel. And for the majority of people, not being able to fly was the easiest sacrifice that they were able to make. And I often wonder that sometimes that governments, pulled the sort of the air travel lever first for that reason, because A, it was a way to sort of to show they were doing something, and B, it had broad public support, and of course C, it didn't inconvenience most people too much. And I think that that's actually a lesson as we go forward into sort of climate change and to sustainability. And there have been polls that have been done. There was one done here in the UK where people were presented with a range of choices. If you had to do the following things, so to mitigate environmental damage and global warming, etc., which would be easiest to give up? And most people said flying. As I said, it's it might be inconvenient not being able to go to Tenerife or to Lanzarote or to Benidorm once a year, but it's not going to materially really sort of affect your life for a lot of people. And I think
what were some of the other options?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Owning a pet, eating meat, driving a car, and things like that. And those were the options that were put forward. And obviously, in that spectrum, for most people, as I said, who just travel, who fly casually and just go on vacation once or twice a year, it is the easiest lifestyle choice to sort of to do, and the easiest thing to sort of to show that they're doing something for for environmental concerns. So yes, people are flying now again, and air travel has picked up. And as people like Michael O'Leary are saying, sort of the flights are fuller than ever. But that can change, and we need to look back during the time of the pandemic to remember that. The other example I often give at conferences is the example of smoking on planes. Now, my mother, she used to.
Huge fan.
I remember.
Huge fan, by the way.
She used to. My mother used to always book the smoking section on planes. I remember Shashank telling a story that the very first international flight he was on, he was sitting, behind a bunch of smokers. And even today, you find older aircraft, of course, where the ashtray is still there as a legacy of those days.
Yeah.
Now,
you can't MEL it.
Right, and if you say
actually, I joke about that, but it's very true. There's a tangent, and I'm sorry, Dirk. But it's worth it. It's one of my favorite stories. The ashtray at the LAV must be there for that aircraft to be airworthy, because
Right, okay.
they have, if somebody lights up, they have to have a place to put it, right? These are the legacy things that kind of come with us. Okay, carry on with the story.
So social attitudes can change, because if you were just to say to people today, smoking on planes, if you're under 30, it would be a completely crazy idea, that you're able to do this. And of course, for decades, this was a very commonplace practice. And climate groups use this as an example to show how within a generation, something which was totally normal can then be socially unacceptable. In the Netherlands, climate groups ran a campaign where they showed, you're a soccer fan, so you'll appreciate this, where Johan Cruyff, the famous Dutch footballer, he used to promote cigarettes, like a lot of sports fans did in the 1970s. And they ran this campaign where Cruyff is shown, with a cup of coffee and a bunch of cigarettes, and the tagline was "Smoke responsibly." And their argument was, well, just as smoke responsibly today would be a crazy idea, hence fly responsibly will be a crazy idea in future. Smoke responsibly, you have secondhand smoke. Fly responsibly, flying, you have secondhand emissions, which the majority of people who don't travel a lot, are exposed to via global warming. So that is the challenge that the industry has to face. And certainly in the next 5-10 years, I think that there will be a shift in perceptions that, the spotlight will be on airlines even more than they are now. Especially as the effects of global warming become more obvious. And that's something that's an industry that we need to combat. Now, getting back to the book, the solutions do exist. The technology exists. There is sustainable aviation fuel. There are multiple pathways in which we can produce non-fossil fuel, jet fuel. The technologies exist in terms of hydrogen or electric. There are a lot of very inspiring stories of startups, are trying to find solutions. The question really is time and money. We haven't got a lot of time on our hands, and all this is extremely expensive. Obviously, it costs $1 billion or more to create a clean sheet aircraft. It costs $500 million to $1 billion or more to create a new SAF refinery. Decarbonizing the industry is going to cost, $4 trillion until 2050. This is going to take a hell of a lot of money, and I guess we wanted to do, play a small part in helping to push the industry forward. I know, Shashank, if you want to add something onto that.
I think going back to the zooming out and going on to the overarching conversation, right? I realize that Simplifying is very good at simplifying conversations.
See what you did there.
We are very, very good at simplifying conversations. I can barely say that word, that's why I have to slow down.
You're trying to slip the L in there. You gotta, yeah.
Yeah. If you recall, Courtney, back in the day when we worked with Bombardier, not on the C series, on the Q400, we helped launch the SpiceJet Q400 in India. And the biggest challenge at that time was SpiceJet was going to be the first airline in India to fly a turboprop. Indians at that time were very scared to fly with anything with a fan outside because of the track record of turboprops in the country or in the region. Hence, we worked with the engineers at Bombardier to bring out the fast flying speed, the cruise speed, the lack of noise compared to other turboprops. Just the technical requirements, technical superiority of the plane, and compared it to Jet, and led an education campaign for SpiceJet as a brand so that they could bring customers on. And I believe that was partly responsible for having more than 85% load factors when they launched their Q400 flights in India. We applied the same to the C series for Bombardier, still sticking on the same topic. How do we simplify this messaging, differentiate it versus the A320neo and the MAX at that time, and brought it to market? We are applying the same principles first, to COVID and now to sustainability. How can we simplify this thing? It seems too complex. As you know, aviation is full of jargon and short forms and everything from airport codes to FIDs, and most people don't know what we're talking about. It's the same in sustainability. There's ICCT, there's GREET, there is 15 other things. There's CORSIA, everything is a short form. Yeah. How can we simplify these things So we started by 2 years ago on Earth Day, April 2022, we launched our podcast, Sustainability in the Air, where I said, I'm very curious about this. Let me just interview people who know what they're talking about. So my first guest was Scott Kirby. Second guest was Tony Douglas from Etihad, and so on. And it became a vehicle for simplifying the knowledge around sustainability and the messaging. Then came the book last year, in which we said, okay, the podcast is really being heard by people within the industry. How can we take this messaging beyond the industry in a very, very simple manner? And we decided to highlight examples of people and companies doing it right. Now, we got this wrong the first time around because my first book, Soar, is, as you have it in your hand, Courtney, it has 8 airline brands, 8 chapters. Simple, deep dive on how Air New Zealand, Singapore Airlines, Southwest, how they built really strong brands. Easy. I said, let's follow the same format for the new book. 8 airlines doing sustainability right. We shortlisted, I think, 20 or 25 airlines, sent it off to the publisher, and the publisher started cutting it down and coming back to us saying, listen, we're down to 10, we're down to 8, we're down to 3. 3 credible airlines with sustainability stories. And he said, and I told him, we can't write a book with 3 airlines. We have to rethink this. And that's when Dirk and I completely changed the approach. We said, you know what, let's focus on innovators instead. So the new book, Sustainability in the Air, the first half is all about technology companies from outside aviation. So the outsiders who are coming in and changing aviation. So Heart Aerospace, Zero Avia, Air Company. And the second half of the book is the insiders who are reinventing themselves to become more sustainable. So we have only one airline, Etihad Airways. They are doing things about sustainability today, not in 2050. We have an OEM, Embraer. We have SkyTeam, the alliance, trying to get a consensus globally. And that's how we had to completely rethink and restructure the book. So it's launched really well. It launched number 1 on 3 Amazon categories, not 1. It's crossed the sales of Soar in the first 3 months. Oh wow!
Congratulations!
That we did in the first year. So I think it's an important topic. Like Dirk said, this is what was the quote? The entry drug into sustainability.
Yeah, that's right. That's
the
right.
Gateway drug.
Gateway drug. That's it. Yeah.
The gateway drug into sustainable aviation.
Yeah. The marijuana of the green movement.
Oh, right. I need to change the logo to we need to go from maple leaf days to another kind of leaf now.
The marijuana of the green movement. That's great.
I'm gonna get hate mail on that one.
Oh, yeah, man. You definitely are.
Man.
So I've when I think about what you guys do, you obviously, I would assume that depending on who you're working with, whether it's the culture, whether it's the region, there's got to be massive differences. And how do you adapt to that to be able to? Because you think, I'm sure the flying public in China versus the U.S. right? It's a very different approach, right? And how do you handle that to be able to ultimately do what you do, but in a positive way, right? So what is? Can you share some thoughts on that?
Very good question. I think it goes back down to fundamentally how Simplifying is built and structured. We have been 100% remote since 2008. We are headquartered in Singapore, and we've had team members in Singapore, India, Spain, UK, a Latvian in Spain, a Spanish in Canada. We are completely spread out. We speak over 10 languages among us. That helps us with the cultural understanding of the airlines we are working with. So while I might have an in with, let's say, the Asian carriers, some of our colleagues who speak Spanish, used to lead the work with Latin American airlines, for example. So the cultural understanding overarchingly helps. But more importantly, I think it just goes down to a personal equation or a personal level. What is the individual trying to achieve within the organization, and how can we help them get there? I'll give you a simple example. We were working with LAN Airlines, the precursor to LATAM, in Chile. That was our longest retainer client up until COVID. And the person who was heading up customer experience, he wanted to increase the efficiency of the call center without outsourcing it. Now, in the context of most airlines outsourcing call centers now, it's a big deal. Think about what American did recently, right? He wanted to keep all of the stuff with himself. So we said, okay, let's work this, yeah? Where are the questions coming from beyond the call center? Well, Twitter gets 3 times the volume. Facebook gets X amount of volume. This is back in 2014, 2015, I'm talking about. And we said, okay, you know what? Instead of building a new social media team, why don't we cross-train your call center agents to handle Twitter queries and customer service on Facebook? So it's a new tool they're learning, not new skill set in terms of knowledge base.
Yeah.
I said, okay. And a lot of these people had worked with the airline for a long time. They knew the answers in their head.
Yeah.
How do you change a booking? You know, what kind of aircraft? What's a bag fee? Things like that. We trained them up and we measured efficiencies. And it turned out that each call center agent was able to handle 6 tweets in the same time the guy next to him was handling 1 call. They were 6 times more efficient. The head of CX took this to the CFO approved it, and they at one point had the largest in-sourced customer service team for a Latin American airline. This is something cultural. It's not just business oriented. In this culture, you don't just outsource jobs and fire a lot of people. It's not just economics. It was much more human. So, and I think this comes through in all of the work we do. I don't know, Dirk, if you want to share an example here from another part of the world.
The boss just put you on the spot, man. Come up with a good story, quick.
Well, I'm not as good as sort of as the at storytelling as Shashank, but I mean, yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of looking at this at the sustainability, sort of brief. I mean, obviously, you are dealing with different audiences and different levels of kind of climate awareness throughout the world. I mean, you mentioned China, obviously, or sort of the Middle East or the Far East, and clearly, sort of the concerns of airlines and consumers in somewhere like, like China or India is going to be very different than is here in the UK or in the Netherlands or in Canada, for example. So you have to, create messaging and you have to create, solutions that are as applicable, to an airline which has just, ordered, say in Indian terms, has just placed a record order of 500 aircraft to European counterparts which are under heavy pressure from climate activists.
Okay, I've got a list of questions. I'm going to start with the most recent, because I'm fascinated, because then I want to get back into sustainability. Just to put a bookmark out there, I want to talk about Etihad, I want to talk about Embraer and kind of what you saw and why you picked them. But before we do that, I really want to talk about Air India and their rebranding and kind of how you look at that world. That seems to be the most kind of the largest. I mean, it's more than a rebranding. I mean, it's a restructuring and of everything. But how do you look at Air India, especially Shashank, with your knowledge of kind of the Asian market there?
Absolutely. I was born in Delhi, for the record, so I'm Indian by birth, although I'm Canadian now. So there's deep emotional connection to everything Air India did or didn't do. I have only ever boycotted 2 airlines in my life, Air India being one of them, and United being the other. They dragged someone off.
All right.
and with United, I was very public. That ban is no longer there for United, because they really did a good job with their app now. Air India, I remember actively discouraging my parents ever to fly Air India, or my in-laws or anyone else. And that's because it might be the cheapest fare, but you don't know how it's going to hold up. You don't know what the food is going to be, what the service is. There's just gross inconsistencies. And I don't believe there could have been anyone better than Tata, the group that now acquired Air India, to turn it around. Tata understands India. They understand Indian conglomerates. They also know how to build global Indian brands like Jaguar, which is also owned by Tata, or Land Rover. So I don't think anyone else could have done the job. The fact that they have a significant stake from Singapore Airlines helps their cause in the airline. Campbell Wilson, I have known him for many years. He actually used to run Singapore Airlines for Canada, based out of Vancouver back in the day. He's a Kiwi, and I think he'd done a fab job at Singapore Airlines as head of brand. Singapore Airlines and the brand is the country,
Sure.
if you think about it. So um, I think that they are on a very good track now. There's a lot of work to be done. They've got the 350s, they've got the new livery. I'm not personally a fan of the new livery, but that's very, very
Interesting.
subjective. Whether you like whether you like, I think the design is trying to do too much at the same time. It's a bit like Air New Zealand, when the old Air New Zealand only had the Koru, and the new Air New Zealand has the Koru and the Fern. I think two symbols of the nation on the plane at the same time confuse people rather than
That's interesting.
build brand affinity. Similarly, in Air India's case, you've got way too many colors, way too many elements, trying to do too much, in my humble opinion, from a brand perspective. Having said that, brand is ultimately delivered in flight. And I like what Air India is doing there. I like the infusion of culture in their safety video that they've recently released. I like the infusion of world standards in their in-flight product that they are soon to be flying on the A350s. Clarification, the A350s Air India has got now currently has the unmodified Aerofloat product flying. That is not the new Air India product. That will happen sometime in the next couple of years when they start taking the non-Aerofloat A350s. I like the consistency with which they are looking at the brand translating down to customer experience. That's what gives me hope. So I'm still hopeful. I'm still discouraging my parents to fly with them for the next couple of years or so.
They have to prove themselves.
But I'm hopeful that slowly but surely these efforts should pay off. And there's so many people who fly from India to the US and Europe who currently do a one-stop flight. With Air India flying the A350s and 787s, non-stop options becoming as good as the one-stop options on the Emirates and the Etihads of the world, I think it's going to be much better for Indians in particular to be flying their national carrier, which is worthy of carrying them globally. And guess what? You actually reduce your carbon emissions if you fly non-stop on most places as opposed to one-stop.
Yeah, it was the safety video that piqued my interest recently, and I just remember watching it being like, "Wow, that's India. That's like an Indian carrier. Like, where has the Indian flag carrier been?" I'm like, well, they've been there the whole time. They just didn't really seem to say they were. It's just so it's so good. Just go, if listeners haven't seen it, just go watch it on YouTube. I'm sure it's out there. I mean, it's full of Indian culture, and they've really planted the flag. Like, we're gonna be the Indian carrier, and it seems to be kind of the story from a brand perspective right now that's in the most flux and the most movement. So I'm really excited to see what's happening there. But let's talk Etihad and sustainability.
Dirk, do you want to take Etihad? I'll take Embraer.
I'm gonna pass it back to you because I wrote the Embraer chapter, and you know quite a lot about Etihad and interviewed them. I think that you're the expert to do this one, and I'll chip in.
Wait, you wrote the Embraer chapter, Dirk?
I did.
And that's why he wanted it, because it was better.
Now you're getting some
perks of being the boss.
Some skeletons.
Could be the key.
No. This was teamwork. Dirk actually wrote the whole book. I've been just looking good. But Etihad, let's talk about Etihad. So we shortlisted a lot of airlines. In fact, we had one full chapter written on an airline from the Americas, I would say, which was rejected by the publisher because it was too CSR-ish rather than just sustainability. It was all about ESG and helping local employment rather than only sustainability. And he said, this is a book about sustainability, not about social good. So let's focus on the environmental side of it. And as we kept searching, the focus became, who is an airline doing something today? At that time, Etihad had announced the world's first or longest flight operated on sustainable aviation fuel to COP, which was in Sharm el Sheikh a couple of years ago. where they would buy sustainable aviation fuel from World Energy in Los Angeles, equivalent to all the passengers flying from Washington D.C. to Sharm el Sheikh for COP. And I thought, wow, this sounds so complex. This is the place for me to simplify these things. How does this work? How can you even? So they're not even putting sustainable aviation fuel on the flight. Yet the flight is completely neutral. How does this even work? Which is when I learned about this term called book and claim, where just like buying energy on the grid, you can have your house as fully green energy, but none of the electrons might be coming from a non-coal fired plant because you are paying for it for somewhere else. So that's what they did. They basically bought equivalent amount of SAF, which was pumped out at Los Angeles through World Energy. Thought, okay, this is an airline that's doing something. And we approached them and we realized they're actually doing a lot. They are planting mangroves in the desert so that they are, mangroves are like, what do we call them? Blue carbon. They suck a lot of carbon out of the air.
Oh, interesting.
They are doing a lot of work on operational efficiencies and contrail avoidance, another first airline. So they are working with a company called Satavia, which is a Cambridge startup, which helps reduce contrails and the warming effect of those beautiful ice crystals that we see in the air, which as a young boy I loved. But now I realize that they create a heating effect back down on Earth, and Etihad was one of the first doing this.
It's like the secondhand smoke of aviation, right?
I'm going to quote you on that, Courtney, everywhere I go. Thank you for simplifying it.
There you go.
So the thing is, Etihad was doing a lot of things today. They weren't just talking about a net zero 2050 roadmap, or we are going to buy hydrogen aircraft or electric aircraft 15 years from now. They were doing stuff today. And we wanted to get the struggles of, actually our protagonist is the local Arab women and Emirati who had to go pitch this in a room full of white men, to be very honest, and stand her ground. How did she do that? So we've captured her story encompassed within an airline punching above its weight when it did not have any of the mandates of the EU to move on sustainability or the incentives in California to move on sustainability. Yet they're moving. Why and how? And we felt we could not get any other airline to tell that story of doing something today. Many airlines were very good at the future, but Etihad was about today, and that's why we included them in the book. Dirk, anything I missed there? Do you want to add something on Etihad?
No, it's a great example, as you said, because Etihad does not, is not in the front line in the same way that a lot of European airlines are. Yet, they're doing more than 90% of airlines out there, especially in that region, in terms of their commitment to SAF, in terms of their research into new SAF pathways, and into their Greenliner program. So some of the work they've done is certainly very impressive.
I find that fascinating, especially the. Look, one of the major problems of sustainability is that carbon, has a local component, but it's pretty global, right? Like you just dump carbon into the atmosphere in one region, it kind of just adds up around the world. And of all the regions that has the least incentive, really, to spend money for sustainability would be, say, the Middle East, because they literally suck go juice, the stuff that makes airplanes go, they suck it out of the ground there. It's like it just comes out. And yet here we have Etihad making those kind of leading moves in sustainability. I find that fascinating.
And of course, if you look at the UAE in general, the UAE is a country that is very fossil fuel dependent, and the economy is very fossil fuel dependent. But they're also a leader in areas such as solar energy. So it's not quite as one-dimensional as people sometimes make out. Because obviously, they have a lot of land in terms of desert where they can place solar farms. And solar power is very, very cheap. So, so they are making a lot of strides in terms of, renewable energy generation. So it's not as simple, of course, as just saying that they're a petro state or a fossil fuel state, because the reality is a little bit more complicated than that.
In fact, I was just reading a chart. I don't know, Courtney, you shared, or Visual Capitalist shared, which shows that US is now the largest oil exporter and producer in the world, ahead of Saudi Arabia and Russia. And the others come way, way, way behind. I think we should address the why at this point. Why is sustainability even important more than the other parts of the ESG spectrum? And we actually start the book with a few charts. I'll be happy to share those with you in PDF format. But we start with a few charts which show that aviation's emissions are actually growing quite a lot compared to others. It's not that the others are not growing. It's just when you put them against shipping and transport and others, aviation seems to be growing. And you wonder why. You wonder why is the proportion going? One, other industries are decarbonizing faster. Tomorrow you can go buy a Tesla and it's fully electric. If I ask you to board a Uber Green, an electric car pulls up, no matter where you are in the world. And Uber Green is an electric car, zero emissions. But if I ask you to book a flight tomorrow which is green, you can't do that. Not till 2028, which is the first electric flight, which will operate in Sweden. And you just cannot do that. And that's because there are today 29,000 aircraft in the air post-pandemic. And in 2042, there'll be 42,000 aircraft in the air. All of them, almost all of them will be using today's technology. That means they've got two engines, burning fuel. Whether or not you use SAF, it's emitting the same stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That means your gross pollution goes up while other industries are decarbonizing faster. And that's when this argument that airline CEOs use, oh, we're just about 2% of the global emissions, falls flat, because by 2050, aviation will be a quarter of humanity's CO2 emissions. That's when you start thinking about the social license conversation we're having. And that's why we need to act today, not in 10 years' time.
But I want to push back on that a little bit, because that sounds wonderful to me. I'll tell you why. If aviation is a quarter of all carbon emissions, imagine how much overall carbon emissions have dropped. Now, I'm not saying that means we don't do anything, because, hey, once we're 100%, it doesn't mean it's any better. But in the context of Etihad, and what really you kind of laid out as really kind of a novel global approach to this, I'm really kind of interested in the conversation of, okay, if carbon's carbon, which, by the way, it isn't necessarily. I mean, where we emit it, high in the atmosphere, contrails. Look, there are differences there. But dollar for dollar, if I'm Etihad and I'm like, I want to do whatever I can do in the world to reduce CO2 emissions, and I have, I don't know, $100 million. I can reduce more emissions by going and buying a coal plant and turning it off. Bad example, but you get the idea. In that global conversation, this isn't a suggestion that aviation shouldn't progress and move forward. Really, what I guess I'm asking is, how is that message simplified that, look, the low-hanging fruit and dollar for dollar, really resource for resource, it may be better spent in maybe other regions. So LA versus the Middle East, or in other sectors, the coal versus solar or whatever. How is that message,
that's pretty massive,
simplified more from a branding perspective?
You've actually just articulated a sort of a line that some climate activists and some environmentalists take. And I have heard the argument that said, let aviation have the fossil fuel, because you can get more bang for your buck if you decarbonize other industries fast, and and restrict aviation through carbon pricing or through frequent flyer taxes or things like that. And then once we've decarbonized other industries, we can move on to aviation. And there's been research done. I mean, one of the people who we interviewed for the book, and Shashank's also had on her podcast, Professor Susanna Becken, who's a professor for sustainable tourism. She did a study in New Zealand where she now lives, and she did find that sort of that diverting renewable energy to sort of produce green hydrogen for sustainable aviation fuel is much more inefficient than if you use that green energy to let's say to decarbonize the dairy industry in New Zealand, which is obviously a major part of the economy, or to, as you say, to bring coal plants and to replace it with renewable energy. So that argument is made. I guess what you could say against that is that advances in sustainable aviation can benefit other industries too, because obviously we don't just live in isolation. So again, we take green hydrogen, making electrolyzers more efficient that produce green hydrogen out of, that separate H2O into hydrogen and air. That doesn't benefit aviation, that benefits a whole range of sectors. Advances in batteries. Batteries are needed by aviation, they're also needed by long haul trucking, by maritime, and obviously by electric vehicles. If researchers are looking into making batteries that help make electric aircraft fly faster, that benefits other industries too. So there is that counter argument that aviation could be a driver and an engine that will help other industries decarbonize as well.
And I think this illustrates well where the conversation exists today. It's not just around sustainability. It's everything we talk about as humans, because we're really a terrible species when it comes to this type of thing. But the idea that these conversations aren't necessarily able to be had without either the assumption that somebody's automatically saying that, well, aviation shouldn't have to do anything because it's only 2.5%. I put that at the extreme end of the spectrum. Or the extreme other end of the spectrum is that you're a terrible person if you fly, because that's the absolute worst thing that you could do for the environment. Drive your ancient car in the meantime. The reality of the conversation that isn't necessarily being had is in the middle, and that's what fascinates me so much about kind of Etihad. And I mean, they kind of went one step further into the idea of, hey, we're going to put good old fashioned Jet A in this thing, and we're going to look out to LA on the SAF side, look, it's still aviation, and actually improve things. But there's a branding issue with that, right? You're still burning. So how it sounds like they were successful in delivering that message, as it was successful and sustainable, which is all just a version of where we are in the sustainability. But how were they able to deliver that message that sounds like was successful and accepted?
It was delivered based on the actions taken as opposed to something we will do in the future.
Good point. Yeah.
Of aviation or airlines communications about sustainability is either too far, or if it's about today, it's very, very cursory. For example, KLM having this one Instagram image about coffee grounds and then getting slammed for greenwashing for recycling coffee grounds. There was a big story there. They could have done a better job of storytelling, where, again, the lessons we have learned 15 years working with airlines on their brand can be now applied to sustainability. And Courtney, I'm sure you appreciate, it's not just the customers that are being communicated to. There are 5 stakeholders here. Some airlines will need to communicate to customers. In the Netherlands and Sweden, they are climate aware. Some airlines will need to communicate to investors. Low-cost airlines owned by, let's say, Indigo partners in Latin America, their investors want these NASDAQ-listed companies to have a net zero roadmap for 2050. Some airlines will need to communicate to the governments. Most of EU, how are you meeting the mandates? Oh, here's my hydrogen airplane order book. Some will need to communicate to employees. Airlines are big employers, you know that. British Airways has 30,000 employees, American has 50,000 employees. These are important stakeholders. Why should they even work for the airline if, they in the future, if they think, it's going to be polluting the world? And then finally, there are, in certain countries and regions, climate activists that you need to address. Most countries don't have that yet, but in the case of Netherlands or SAS Scandinavian, that's a primary target audience. Yeah. They'll be sitting at press conference and expect disruptions, right? So simplifying the message for each of these groups is not easy. And it has to be based on work that is being done, actions that are being taken, and then you communicate it. It's not about, here's something way out in the future and here's what I'm doing. It's like Southwest, which has just invested in a SAF plant, LanzaJet, a SAF company. Hey, now that's something to talk about. Southwest until now has not really talked about much. I had Helen Giles, their head of sustainability, on my podcast, and she talks a lot about all of their efforts. But now is when they can really start talking about it because they've invested in a SAF plant, right? So you got to talk about rubber hitting the road, and not something unfathomable in the future. Because guess what? In 50 years' time, your CEO will not be here, your board will not be here, you will not be here.
I think that's the point. Frankly, I mean, look, the longevity of a CEO. Yeah, anything you can promise beyond your longevity is free, right? I mean, in essence. But I don't want to move past the KLM coffee grounds thing because this is fascinating to me. I knew nothing about this. I've never heard this. I don't know. Maybe it was just a terrible branding effort. What I'm most interested in from a branding and really a messaging and a communication perspective, from a sustainability perspective, in addition, KLM, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that, recycling coffee grounds, net positive. Like, sounds like a cool thing to do. Yet the term greenwashing gets applied. Now, it may have been justified to use that. Is KLM now less likely to communicate sustainability efforts, or God forbid, actually take action because of the backlash from something that they genuinely thought was sustainable?
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. And it's not just KLM. It's not just KLM that is freaked out about communicating anything. In every meeting at KLM, I'm sure comms is being, there's legal oversight, plus more legal. And the moment you have
your
5
defensive,
legal people yeah, exactly. It's not just KLM. We were having a conversation with a Middle Eastern airline, and we said, you're doing some really good work here. Why don't you talk about it? And the answer was, have you not seen what happened to KLM?
Yeah, oh, man.
Said, but they're, and my point was, they're in Netherlands, different jurisdiction. And they said, no, we fly daily to Amsterdam.
Yeah.
So airlines today are oscillating between greenwashing and green hushing. That's what I mean by them playing defense.
Did you coin that term?
No, we did not coin it.
We'll put the little trademark next to it, simplifying, coin hushing, green hushing.
And the oscillation between greenwashing and green hushing, and both of them are not right. You have to focus on storytelling, which is different from different audiences, like I defined, and you have to simplify it. You can't be talking in jargon, and you still can't oversimplify it. Maybe Dirk, you want to share an example of an airline doing it well, or why KLM got slammed for this coffee ground stuff?
Well, I mean, I think the problem with the KLM example. I mean, it was an image of some flight attendants holding up some coffee grounds, and it was we recycle our coffee grounds. And I guess that I'm just sort of to hypothesis. Someone in the social media team probably thought this seems like a cool thing to do, cool message to send out. Now the problem was there was no context. Because KLM got laughed at, sort of for the reason they got a lot of pushback on social media was that, well, you're recycling your coffee grounds, whoopee, and you're burning all this carbon. And of course, KLM, to their credit, they do other things. But the way that it was presented without any kind of, without anything around it. It was a context-free picture. And I think that's, getting back to storytelling, that's what airlines have to do. They have to tell the whole story of what they're doing. They have to show how recycling coffee grounds is not going to, move the needle when it comes to reducing the airline's carbon footprint. Recycling is a good thing, on its own. It is certainly something positive, and also to tell the story about how, what happens to that coffee. Does it get, does it get turned into organic material? Does it get turned into something? So, it is just important to provide context, to tell a story, and not to make it seem as if you're doing something more than what you should be. I mean, the example, obviously, that we use quite a lot is in the US, United with Oscar the Grouch. Now, they've run a whole campaign around Oscar the Grouch being their chief trash officer, and it showcases how United, through their investment in Fulcrum Bioenergy, is turning municipal waste or trash into SAF. Obviously, Oscar is a character who's associated with trash, and he produces these educational videos to show how your household waste can be turned into fuel that powers your next flight. Now, when you go onto the microsite that United has, they are very, very careful, sort of to qualify the fact that right now less than 1% of their fuel is sustainable aviation fuel. So, so they are very careful to sort of to say, this is future looking. This is something we're investing in. This is something that is happening a little bit today. It'll happen a lot more tomorrow. But we want to show you some of the, some of the strides that we're making in the space, and to, and to articulate it in a way that people can actually understand. So that's actually a good example of an airline which is not making overblown claims. They really are turning trash into staff, are presenting it in a very user-friendly manner, and are very careful to sort of to say, yeah, that that they're not, that their whole fleet is not being powered by by garbage-based sustainable aviation fuel. It is 99% still fossil fuel, but it is something they're doing that can benefit people in the future.
So from KLM's perspective, clearly, I mean, I haven't seen the social media outreach. The backlash suggests that they could have done better, as you were talking about. This is why they should hire you. But from the climate activist perspective, what interests me so much about this specific case is, I think from what you've said, there's clear evidence that accusing a company of greenwashing made things worse actively. Because the unintended effects are now that companies are not gonna look, the worst thing you can do is something, right? If there's a risk that it could backlash like that, the safe thing to do is just sit there on your hands and keep your mouth shut, which obviously is not sustainable. See what I did there?
Yeah, I mean, Shashank talked earlier about this idea of of eroding aviation social license, and actually that is one of the aims that what a lot of climate activists are trying to do. I mean, they wanted to push air travel in the same advertising bucket, if you like, as tobacco, or as alcohol, where you actually can't say very much. Where obviously any ads that you run, A, you can't advertise in public spaces, and B, everything comes with a huge health warning. So that is exactly the agenda, to erode aviation social license to the extent that that talking about it carries the same very tight restrictions as it is if you're a tobacco company talking about the products that you make.
Yeah,
I mean, the interesting thing. Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
No, I was just going to say it. I think it all comes back down to the messaging, right? I mean, as you say, it's because on one hand, you aviation needs to be held accountable for the emissions that the carbon emissions, everything else, right? But as Courtney mentioned, there is definitely a lot of other, I think, areas that would have a bigger impact, and so it comes down to the messaging, which is based on all of this, right? Is really tough, because if you mention anything that somebody feels is not worthy, then you get basically bashed because of the fact that you're not focused on reducing your own stuff, right? You're trying to you do something else, which at the end of the day, I think that's where the consistency probably needs to come in, right? It's just to go out there and say, look, we understand that it's going to take time for us to reduce our own carbon footprint, but in the meantime, we're taking steps to take it from somewhere else and help that part of the industry get better, because we can do it now. So it's
exactly. And if you zoom out back to the brand side, right? Courtney, you and I worked together, years ago. And if you look at airline brand was never risky. Risk within aviation was to do with safety and legal and customer rights. It was not about marketing. It was a cool job to get to be an airline marketer or to be an aviation brand strategist. Now it's a risky thing. And that's what is new. My mother tongue is Hindi, and there's a saying in Hindi which is "Doodh ka jala, pani ko bhi fook fook ke pita hai." What that means is, if you're burnt with fire once, you won't even hold a candle that is not lit. You're really risk averse.
Once bitten, twice shy, as they say. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Your Hindi is getting better, Dirk, day by day. You gotta keep at this. And you explained it way better than I did to the non-Hindi speaking audience of this podcast. The interesting thing is, airline marketers and CMOs and even CCOs are not used to this level of scrutiny
Yeah.
for the messages they put out there. If there's an ad that goes wrong, and there have been ads that go wrong. In my first book, Soar, Courtney, chapter 3, I talk about Finnair. And when Finnair was launching in China, they had big billboards which said, "Fly Finnair, the shortcut to Europe." Now, interestingly, for 3 years they ran that ad. And then somebody came up to them in China, in Shanghai, saying, your ads don't make sense. It's like, what are you talking about? The coolest ads ever. Shortcut to Europe, right? And they said, well, there is no literal translation for the word shortcut in Mandarin. It's actually shortcut, like with the scissors. So it doesn't make sense what you're saying. It's two words, short and cut, not shortcut. So it took them 3 years to change that messaging to then say the fastest way to Europe. It made complete sense. There was a word in Mandarin for the fastest way to Europe. It took them 3 years. But what was lost other than potential sales and some confusion? Nothing. Here, airlines are facing millions of dollars in lawsuits if they just get one word wrong, which is what Lufthansa did, not KLM. And airline marketers are not used to this level of scrutiny and risk. And that's what's turning this whole field against them. And that's what's leading to greenwashing, which I think is doing a disservice because many airlines that are doing good work are not even talking about it because they're saying, oh, look what happened to KLM.
Actually, let's take Lufthansa as an example. I mean, Lufthansa did, here in the UK, did lose a greenwashing case from the Advertising Standards Authority for some of the wording that they used in some of their online ads. Now, the comparison with United, Lufthansa does have stories to tell that are as good as the United trash to SAF story. To take an example, the Lufthansa Group has invested in a Swiss company called Synhelion. Synhelion is an eSAF company, and they use solar power to create power to liquid fuels. Now, when Lufthansa first announced this tie-up, they talked about, the headline was "Fuel from Sunlight," and I thought to myself, after they got slammed for this greenwashing case, why on earth didn't they run a campaign about fuel from sunlight? Fuel from sunlight, it's something, it sounds great, and it is real. Synhelion does have a demonstration plant in Germany. They have a solar field, and they're producing SAF. So it is not make-believe. It is something that is actually happening. And you can tell some great stories around it. But instead, they relied on these standard advertising slogans and buzzwords, where you will be challenged, and where climate activists will kind of raise greenwashing cases against you. So the way that airlines market themselves, the way that they market their sustainability initiatives, yes, there is a path forward, but they can't do it in the way that they did it 10, 15 years ago.
Interesting. Yeah. Can we quickly talk Embraer? I do want to hear your example.
Yeah, and then we're getting to the hour and a half plus.
Yes.
So yeah, I know. You see, it goes by fast.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Embraer. I mean, Embraer, obviously, that there's two elements to Embraer's program. First of all, Embraer is working on a next generation regional aircraft, which will first of all be hybrid electric and then be hydrogen. But there's also Eve. And Eve is their eVTOL project. Now, Eve is a separate company, but it's majority owned by Embraer, and they use Embraer's IP, they use Embraer's production facilities, it's Embraer executives that staff that company. Now, eVTOLs, as you know, have been quite controversial. There are claims, they're criticized for some of the wild claims that they make, about electric air taxis in the sky, price of an Uber Black. There'll be hundreds flying over our rooftops, etc., etc. And critics say that really all this will be a tool for the most elite flyers to be able to get from the city centre to the airport and bypass the traffic of people down below. And I saw one commentator say the other day that based on Archer's aircraft price and based on the orders that they have, that the likely price of a 20-minute trip won't be $20, it'll be more like $200. Now, one of the things that impressed me about Eve is that the use cases they've got are actually very far away from this. So, for example, they're doing work with Widerøe in the Norwegian Airlines, and Widerøe will use these, Eve's electric air taxis to, to connect, many of these remote Norwegian islands with the mainland. they've teamed up with a subsidiary of Kenya Airways, to see how eVTOLs can be used on tourist flights, or again to connect remote communities. They're looking at one of the things. I've sat through a lot of presentations through EV executives, and they talked about things called polycentric cities. So especially in the US, you take things like the Bay Area of San Francisco or Orlando, where you have a city center, but you have economic centers that are dispersed. Obviously, public transport is a bit sketchy. The infrastructure isn't there, and there's a lot of traffic on the roads. And and for cities like Orlando, these eVTOLs could be a way to sort of connect Universal or Disney with the university, with the central business district, with some of the science and innovation areas with the airport. And Eve has also signed an agreement with United for the Bay Area of San Francisco to look at how let's say how Silicon Valley can be connected with some of the airports there, with some of the economic centers. So I think that the way that they're approaching eVTOLs is very, very interesting. And it's beyond just sort of a tool for frequent flyers to get from the airport to the city center. Eve also impressed with a statement that one of their executives made during the interviews, which is that the mission defines the architecture rather than the other way around. So one of the criticisms that is made in the space, that people are building these shiny tools and are then going backwards and trying to find a sort of a use case for them. Whereas Embraer starts, what is the use case? What is the mission? Then we look at what the architecture is, and then we look at what it is, and that is why they're doing the step-by-step program for the next generation aircraft project. First of all, hybrid electric, then hydrogen electric, then eventually 50-seater, and then moving forward from there. So they're approaching in a very smart way, and they're making real progress, both on the regional aircraft side and on the eVTOL side.
Which brings me to one last company that we have not talked about that I would argue is the most sustainable of all in aviation. And that is a non-aviation company, Landline, and what's happening. Dollar for dollar, pound of CO2 to pound of CO2, short haul flights, right? It's, by the way, beautiful picture of their bus sitting next to an Air Canada A220 C Series that is just stunning. But that is today the most sustainable way to handle these short haul flights, and we've been doing it forever. And by the way, these aren't even electric buses yet. They will be, because that's the best and most efficient way to do that. So here is a solution to an aviation sustainability problem that actually pulls back from aviation, because it's a great use of these assets. Air Canada, United, American, Sun Country. I hope I'm not forgetting any. They all use Landline, or they will, with the Air Canada deal.
I love it. I absolutely love it. We covered this concept in the book. It's called intermodality. In
Cool.
Europe, it's about plane and train. So Lufthansa has code shares with the Deutsche Bahn. Air France KLM have code shares with their SNCF, the local trains. In the US, obviously, the train infrastructure is nowhere close to Europe. But Landline is fascinating because they are putting their codes on the airline. You're connecting seamlessly as if you're connecting to a plane, but you're taking a 2-hour ride. And then guess what? I'm not sure if the passengers mind, because you're saving time going through security, driving home and all that stuff. You're just getting dropped off in the city center. I personally love it. And I don't think the day is far. Maybe until the buses get electric, we put biodiesel on these buses, and they're even greener.
Yeah.
Ensuring that
those increments are there. Yeah.
Exactly. And these smaller town US cities that lost service from the fall of regional aviation that, Courtney, you very well covered, and the slide of that, Landline is doing a fantastic job, and we have to look outside of aviation for innovative solutions. That's why half the book is outsiders coming into aviation. Interesting you mentioned Landline. I do have a interview scheduled with the CEO for my podcast with Landline, as well as the Rail Europe, being the first to non-aviation.
Is it with David Sunday?
Yes.
Drop my name.
I will.
That'll get some conversation starting.
Yeah.
Yeah, be like, hey, who's this Courtney lady? And he'll be like, let me tell you about Courtney. And then it's
all
free
right.
conversation from there on out.
Done. That's how we start.
All right, gents. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. I'm really glad I got to meet both of you and hear about all the things that you're doing. Fantastic success from from when you started in 2008 till what you're doing today, and obviously, so it's great to hear. And you're definitely out there, kind of pushing out the right message. I think trying to help people do that better. Hopefully, I don't know if on the sustainability front, I don't know if it's one of those things that will get better. I think it's probably going to get worse before it gets better in terms of like the scrutiny and everything else, because it definitely seems like there's a lot of challenges ahead of that. But
there's work for Simplifying to be
Absolutely, yeah.
A lot of people to work with for sure.
Yeah, but this has been really nice. Yeah,
I think we've been early. So I'll end with a little anecdote. I was not convinced about Simplifying, moving into sustainability or starting a practice until Dirk forced me a few years ago to calculate my carbon footprint. I was like, come on, I drive an electric car. I live in BC, our grid is electric. I had just turned vegan at that time. How bad can it be? I calculated my footprint. That year, I had only taken 45 flights. That was not even my peak year of flying. And boy, I literally fell off my chair because my personal carbon footprint was twice that of the highest per capita country in the world. When it comes to CO2.
Two Qataris. You were the
yes. two Qataris. I didn't want to point out, but I was like, really? This is twice as bad as an oil-producing nation? I cannot believe it, and it was all due to my flying. And I said, you know what? I can only start where I can start. So a few years ago, I took 75 flights a year in full openness. We are working in aviation, so we fly quite a bit. Just before COVID in 2019, I took 45 flights. Last year, and actually the year before, I consciously cut my flying down and I took 15 flights in 2022. And this year in 2024, my first flight of the year for work will be on Easter. So I want to do my part, and I think I'm a more profitable passenger on a yield basis to an airline because I'm taking non-stop flights as much as possible when I can, as opposed to cheap multi-stop flights. But I think we all should wake up and see how we can contribute to this, either by having a discussion like we had today, an open discussion, to taking actions that show that we can do something today rather than just waiting for someone else to do it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think we found out where all that business passenger revenue just went. It was Shashank.
Yeah,
mystery
75
solved.
To 15.
Thank you. Post-COVID, not coming back.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Truly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Garrett.
It was 92 last week.
What? 92
degrees.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's like that's only 6 shy of a boy band.
Wow. That was bad.
That was great.
How many people really listen? I think it's more than just us. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. It's
I don't know. I'm going to take the under. I'm going to take the under on that one.
And let me rephrase.
Because I know I didn't download it.